pollen. It's killing me. My eyes tear.
You know what sinus is? I've read a couple of medical bulletins that have come out. And one of the reasons why people continue to have sinus is because the medicine prescriptions that are prescribed for that don't go into the fungus is that fungus is what stays there, and it doesn't. The medicines don't attack that. But if you get these the medicines that have attack the fungus in there, it gets rid of postnasal drip, gets rid of the sinus, opens up all the sinuses and all.
What medicine is that?
Well, I've got. I'm going to order some tomorrow because after reading all those medical journals about how the fungus affects people in there. See, because you can use the nasal spray, you can take all that other stuff, Mary, but that happens.
I tear.
And see, and
This is the pollen.
yeah, pollen. But the other thing too, even if you don't have pollen, because you've got the sinuses up here and down here,
And in your teeth.
see, and up and round in here, and when it happens, you got some little small, like canals that get stopped up right in here, and that's one of the problems. And that fungus constitutes that. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Glad to have you here for our Chatham Area Transit Board of Directors agenda for March the 24th. We thank all of you for coming this morning, and what I'd like to have the roll call now.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Chairman Hackett.
Here.
Dr. Thomas.
Thank you. Good morning.
Mr. Booker.
Here.
Mr. Dawson.
Here.
Mr. French.
Here.
Mr. Holmes.
Present.
Mr. Megadol.
Here.
Ms. Osborne.
Here.
Ms. Stone. Present. Thank you.
Next on the agenda, the approval of the February 17th CAT meeting. Need a motion on the floor.
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion on the floor and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 3, action items. Award of bus rehabilitation contract.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our only action item of the day. Staff is requesting board approval to award a contract for bus rehabilitation services to coach crafters. The board approved the issuance of the RFP. RFP was granted in December. Staff was hoping to rehabilitate 25 fixed route buses. These are the red and white buses that you see on the street. That will include a engine, transmission, HVAC, new brakes, body work, paint, suspension. It's a rework of of the entire bus. With the overhaul of the rehabilitation, this will add 6 years to the life of the vehicle. And if I could, just for recap purposes, one of the things that CAT has historically gotten into is buying buses at batches of 20 and 25 at a time. The net result of that is that also means that they get old at the same time. And one of the things that we work to do our strategic plan, we talked about the procurement of buses on an annual basis so that we could equalize our fleet age and have a consistent rehab and replacement, purchase and retirement system that will coincide with industry standards. This procurement here is probably one of the most significant ones that we're going to have next to the construction of this facility, because it relates directly to changing the way the agency moves going forward with these 25 rehabs. So these buses will add up to 6 years to the useful life, but it will put us on schedule to purchase buses each year, retire buses each year on a consistent basis. It sets the framework for that. So we received 2 proposals, one from Coach Crafters and one from W.W. Williams. We awarded 30 points for the firm qualifications, the staffing 30 points, the price was 30 points, and the DVE participation was 10 points. a review, all the information that's associated with the RFP, and the scoring is attached for your review. We went through and we, staff, Terry and Lamar had to work diligently with the Federal Transit Administration to get this project funded and approved for the rehab program. And we actually have 2 grants that will fund the 80% of the 80% of the match for this, and the other 20% comes from SPLOS, which we have approval for the SPLOS purchases to do. So the total contract award is for $2.9 million to rehab 25 vehicles.
I have one question. The Atlanta, Georgia being in the state, was any weight put on that?
There is no weight given to that. However, there is a new pending rule that's coming out. Terry, can you brief us? And it's not in place yet, but they're taking comments on it.
Right, there's a comment period of 30 days, and the FTA is trying to extend it to allow agencies a chance to respond. But there's a new legislation that they want to start next year that will loosen our restriction and allow us to give geographic preference points in our RFPs, which will of course help us choose not only Georgia vendors but also Savannah and
Right, I mean, I just hate the fact that this amount of money is going to go out of state, that's all.
Until those changes are made, the current FTA regulations prohibit giving any local preference except for architectural and engineering.
Okay, well, it's just a shame, that's all.
And there's also a significant difference in price as well. What was the final price for?
I can't remember the details,
Well, it's
but
about
I
$1
can
million
surely
higher.
double check that and get the information to everybody.
My question, however, goes with the qualifications for the 4 criteria that we looked at. How did Atlanta stack against Florida?
Do what now?
How did they measure up?
Atlanta,
I don't see the other rehab qualifications. These are the 4 criteria based on Coach Crafters, correct?
right.
Ms.
How does-
Osborne, if you'll flip over a couple of pages.
It's here.
I don't see anything on my next page. Oh, wait a minute, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon.
So that very first section, Coach Crafters averaged about 28, and it looks like W.W. Williams was a few points lower at 25 or 26 on the qualifications.
Yeah, turn it next.
One more.
You got it now?
Yes, I have.
Okay, good. Priscilla?
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but what specifically were the differences that allowed you to come to the decision of choosing?
Specifically,
Yeah.
as laid out in the name, this is the only business that Coach Crafters is in. They rebuild buses,
Okay.
and they do them for everyone around the country, whereas W.W. Williams does trucks, etc. We have a contractual relationship with W.W. Williams on some of our maintenance, but they're primarily a engine transmission company, whereas Coach Crafters also does in-house body work, HVAC,
Great.
frame, so on and so forth.
Fantastic. And one last thing, I just want to make a comment of saying that I'm glad to see that you're taking this action in terms of doing it, on a regular basis rather than having to purchase like 25 at one time. If we do it on an alternate basis, as you mentioned, or whatever, I believe that we would come out much better as a organization in terms of the uses of the buses and the longevity of them, because each year prices goes up and things are very, very expensive. So the least amount of buses that we have to repair in a given time, I think would be a plus for us rather than having to purchase 25 at one time.
And we're talking in the neighborhood of 500,000.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about.
So about 13 million.
Bill, Wayne, and then Mary.
Were you at all surprised that we only had 2 bidders? Or 2 submissions?
I not necessarily, because the further away you get, there are basically 3 or 4 major coach rehab companies. And W.W. Williams is kind of new in the business. W.W. Williams actually did my rehab when I was in Gwinnett. But you have Midwest Bus out of Minnesota. You have Complete Coach Works out of California, and you have Coach Crafters in Florida. So those are the 3 major rehab facilities, and so you have to take into account transportation costs. So what Coach Crafters had to build in to their costs is also 2 things they had to build in. They had to build in the transportation costs to get the bus to and from there, and they had to have a local warranty location. So anything that happens while these buses are rehab, there's a warranty that goes along with it. So they had to establish a relationship here locally to maintain the warranty. So those are the 2 things, but it's not necessarily surprising given the likelihood of going to Minnesota or California.
Right. And what about, I noticed, and I hope I didn't misread it, but neither of them got any points for disadvantaged business enterprises, is that correct?
That is correct. It is of note, the reason that they didn't get DBE credit is Coach Crafters is a DBE firm, but they're only a DBE firm in the state of Florida, and their DBE doesn't hold true in the state of Georgia. So one of the things that we're going to request for them is to file for
recognition.
No, it's you send in a letter and your license to the state of Georgia, and they'll certify you for a certain period of time. I forget the technical term. It starts with the R though.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So we may be able to pull in DBE credits for the overall procurement, but it's not in place currently.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill covered what I was going to cover. It was disappointing to see that neither one got any points.
The one in Coach Crafters is a certified DBE in the state of Florida. So they'll just simply have to file in the state of Georgia.
And with DBE, it's all or nothing. So if you're not certified with the Georgia Department of Transportation, you get 0, and if you are, you get the full points. So you'll never see.
So nobody gets
partial
5.
point. No.
Right.
No,
Unless
no.
it's a larger one and they use subcontractors to make up a certain percentage, and then you may be able to split the points on that. But for this one, since it was a wholly owned proposal, then it's all or nothing.
And we do have staff that will assist Coach Crafters through the application process, and if they're awarded the certificate anytime during the job, then the whole amount from the beginning of the contract to the end will count for CAT's DBE participation.
My question is to Terry. Do you have any idea of what's being proposed for geographical points awards to these kind of contracts with the state of Georgia?
Basically, what the legislation will do is allow you the preference. Right now, if
no percentage points though?
The board decides that.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll
Because I hope
have
that we
another
would still
category.
stick to the serious criteria of the qualifications of the company as opposed to geographical preference.
Well, what
That's
we
just
do
my
is
statement.
before we issue an RFP, we come to the board, and in the board packet, it has the evaluation criteria listed. As you recall, it's been staff recommendation with the exception of one in which the board wanted to change the evaluation criteria for one of the RFPs before we issue. So it comes to the board for approval prior to us even issuing the request for proposals.
All right, and with Chad and his staff did an excellent job on this, because you can see the information and the breakdown and all over that, and that makes a big difference when we have a situation like that, especially when we've got that much money that's involved in that and how it was carried out. Now, what we need is a motion on the floor to award.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I did have one further question for Terry.
Okay.
I think the funding for this is excellent. Would we have the opportunity to exercise that same funding right for our second batch of buses, or that go away? Will all the SPLOST money go away?
No, we'll have the SPLOST funds. The issue will be
The grant.
Because the feds pretty much prefer you to purchase new buses. So for us to get the approval to do the rehab, it took a lot of legwork, conversation, discussions with the FTA engineering program department to show a way forward on how we were going to do this and what our plan was in terms of creating a better foundation just for transit operations going forward.
Thank you.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Have a motion on the floor and a second for the award of the bus rehabilitation contract. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Contract is awarded. Item 4, the state legislative update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have Mike Vacra, our lobbyist for state and local affairs, is here to give a presentation to the board in terms of what's going on at the state level. After this presentation, we're going to ask the board for some guidance and feedback in terms of how do we close out this legislative session.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chad. 7 days to go. 7 out of 40. It's getting to be a little frantic. Last Friday, significant activity both in the House and the Senate on crossover day to move legislation from one House to the next. Monday of this week, the House took up one bill. I think the Senate took up 2. They're gradually working up to what I'm anticipating on Thursday and Friday of this week will be probably 20 to 30 bills in each House that will be considered. The committees are working pretty frantically to make it through. They're in every day this week. I was there yesterday. When I finish here, I'll be going back up there. I'll be there the rest of the week. Then they're in Tuesday for the 39th day and Thursday for the 40th day. By law, at midnight or thereabouts, they gavel to a close, and that will end the session. Significant number of bills that have been introduced this session. I'm not sure that the flow is any stronger or lighter than it normally is. I think we're at around 700 bills. Normally there are about 1,500 or so that are introduced in the 2-year session. So we're pretty much right on par. Our focus specifically has been CAT, obviously, and transportation. There was a lot of discussion about CAT legislation that the county wanted to move forward with. Thanks to the local delegation, that legislation is not moving anywhere. We did have a delegation meeting yesterday afternoon to discuss the pieces of local legislation that will move forward. Those happen to be funding bills for judges and constitutional officers' salaries to set the local supplements. So CAT legislation, for all intents and purposes, in fact, if it does not move out of the Senate on tomorrow, it's basically dead. So there will be no movement on those particular pieces of legislation. The item that you have heard the most about has been the Transportation Financing Act, which for nomenclature is HB 170. HB 170 is a piece of legislation that, if you look at it closely, it's really not a transportation bill because it doesn't designate that anything in fact happened on the transportation front. It is a funding bill. It provides money to the Department of Transportation. It is the result of, excuse me, a year-long study of what the transportation infrastructure maintenance needs are. There's a significant financial backlog with DOT. Basically, the legislature and the state have been kicking the can down the road for many years, and there's not much road that you can go down now without a pothole and the can getting stuck. So they're having to really bite the bullet and make some hard decisions that involve raising revenue. Arguably, the DOT has said they need from 1.5 to 2 billion or more per year just to address the maintenance needs of the state. They have a significant backlog of problems with bridges that need to be worked on as well, and those issues are being addressed as part of this legislation and part of the budget, the FY 2016 budget. We've had two versions of House Bill 170 that I know you've heard about. I'm going to talk about the House and then the Senate item by item. The Senate is the version that is prevailing right now, that has passed the Senate and is awaiting action by the House, who will reject the bill. The Senate will reject the rejection, and it will go into conference committee. So there will be 3 members from each House, 3 members from the House, 3 members of the Senate, who will sit down and work out the differences in the bill. Magnitude of the bills, the House, and you will see numbers all over the map because it's very difficult to really figure out exactly what the hard numbers are. Basically, the House legislation raises between $700 and $800 million that would go to the Department of Transportation for basically maintenance purposes. The Senate bill raises approximately $800 million, but $250 million of that would have to be appropriated by the next General Assembly. So the net number on this legislation is actually around $560 million. The governor last week threw down the gauntlet and basically said we have to have a floor of $1 billion. That's what I am expecting the net revenue to be that will go to DOT from this legislation. So there's going to have to be some maneuvering and manipulating to figure out how we get to that point, without necessarily increasing taxes. And for the most part, this is evidenced by a shift of monies that with the underlying concept that anybody that uses a highway should pay for the privilege of using that highway and pay for the maintenance of that highway, no exceptions. And that's going to hit agencies like CAT as well in what is now a modest manner. The House had moved from allowing local governments to collect a litany of local taxes on gasoline and removing the sales tax off of gasoline at the state level to move to an excise tax. And the importance of the excise tax is that motor fuel excise taxes by state constitution are restricted to being spent on roads and bridges. Specific language in the Constitution: motor fuel excise tax, roads and bridges. That's the importance of moving this tax levy to the excise tax, because there was 3% sales tax that was charged on motor fuels at the state level, and then the extra penny of sales tax that was charged as well that went to the general fund. That's going to go. So the state House set 29.2 cents as what the excise tax would be. The Senate has moved that excise tax to 24 cents per gallon, and that, they feel, gives a revenue neutral shift as you move from the sales tax to the excise tax. In the House version, all of the local sales taxes would remain in place, your SPLOST, your eSPLOST, etc. But the money that would be collected on gasoline sales would have to be spent on transportation by the local governments. The Senate said that those sales taxes can stay in place, but they're unrestricted on how they're spent. But a local government can only collect sales tax on gasoline up to a gasoline price of $3.39, which was the average gasoline price for a 6-month or 12-month period. Obviously, we're at low levels now, but when you averaged it out over that period, that's basically how that would be done. Most, those taxes in the House would no longer be allowed to be collected on motor fuels, but the local governments on those two categories of taxes would be able to go from 1 cent to 1.25 cents on that category of sales tax. There's some debate whether it should be 1.25, whether it should be 1.14. Here again, in dealing and mashing the numbers, it kind of depends basically on what your base is and where you put the decimal point. New fees. $200 registration fee for an alternatively fueled vehicle that's a car, $300 for one that would be a commercial vehicle or a truck. The Senate has done the same thing with that. There was some debate about lowering that. That did not pass. The Senate has added a $5 per day rental car fee that would be levied on every motor vehicle rental. So if a tourist comes into town and rents a car, they're going to pay an additional $5 per day on that. There's been some discussion about insurance rentals, mechanics rentals, and the like, if that should be exempted if the rental car is kept more than 5 to 7 days and the renter has a local in Georgia address. So that's going to be in place somewhat. The e-car tax credit of $5,000 per vehicle is gone as of July 15th in both bills. Jet fuel excise tax elimination, sales tax elimination exemption is gone. That is a net of $23 million plus to the coffers. The language sunsets the existing excise tax or motor fuel excise tax exemption that transit authorities, campus transit, and school systems have enjoyed for the past 10 years or so. We've had extensive discussions about this, and the argument basically is if you're riding on the roadways, you need to pay the cost of maintaining the roadways. At the current 24 cents, this will cost us about $93,000 per year. To transit statewide, it's going to be about $3 million. Those numbers may shift one way or the other, but that basically is not going to go away. That's the overriding concept with this legislation. As I said, the Senate has put $250 million annually into the DOT budget, but that's subject to appropriations, so that may or may happen. And in an interesting twist, the Senate has eliminated the sales tax holiday for 2015 that didn't exist for a plus of $43 million. So we've got some interesting accounting going on with this. You can see some of the concerns. So the conferees are going to have to sit down and figure out what parts of the House bill are going to prevail, what parts of the Senate bill are going to prevail. We probably won't see the final version of this bill until next Thursday evening, probably 8 to 10 o'clock, and then it will hit the desks and we'll understand. We'll be in the room and at each one of these conference committee meetings, but generally the way these conference committees work is once they get about 3 days into the meetings, they've pretty much determined what they're going to do and how the pie is going to be divided. Piece of legislation that is very interesting, and let me stop first and say one thing. The money generated in House Bill 170 goes to the state DOT. It is designed for addressing state problems and state issues and maintenance on state roads. It does not affect any local transportation issues. While there was an effort in the House to set aside money for transit, you cannot earmark money outside of what the Constitution allows you to do. House Bill 106, which is a piece of legislation that has not really seen any publicity whatsoever other than an article yesterday in the AJC, moved out of the House last week. Moved out of the Senate last week. It was sent back to the Transportation Committee because there needed to be some changes. It was approved yesterday afternoon and will probably be on the floor in the Senate on Thursday. This resurrects the T-SPLOST, which was the Transportation Infrastructure TIA of several years ago, and for a 2-year period will allow the old roundtable process to move forward and regions can organize and re-offer a T-SPLOS vote, I think on a region by region, well, definitely on a region by region basis, but there's not, as I read it, a consistent date when the election would have to be held. You can levy a fractional cent in a 20th of a cent, so you can levy a half cent. Under the TIA regional proposal, it would be for a 10-year period. If you fail to act by July 1, 2017, then the capability to operate as a region goes away. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what is left then is every county in the state has the capability to hold a T-SPLOS referendum on a county-by-county basis, levying a tax in a fractional amount for 5 years. 99% of that money stays in the local community, local region, to be spent on projects that the locals deem that they want to fund and support. This is where the money is for the locals. This is where the control is for the locals. And so this is the second leg, if you would, of this funding stool that is pretty valuable and really has not been heralded as it should be. Third item, and basically this is the third leg of the stool. The Transportation Study Committee recognized that transit was extremely important to the state and to transportation in many, many ways, and that bridges were a problem. As part of the budget, as passed both the House and the Senate, there is $100 million in bonds for transit. That $100 million is in the House version of the budget. That $100 million is in the Senate version of the budget. And so we feel very secure that that money is going to move forward in the budget. And at the end of the day, when that conference committee comes out, generally they address differences. They don't get in and argue on something where they both agree, because that's a waste of time. So most likely we will see that. There was discussion in the Senate about the fact that certain members were being solicited to vote for HB 170 because there was a promise that $75 million would go to a unnamed state transit agent or unnamed transit agency. That was discounted significantly. Where that came from was that early on, the Atlanta Regional Commission and MARTA had developed a distribution formula that showed that perhaps MARTA could look at receiving either 39 million, 65 million, or 75 million, hence the 75 million figure. That is out there, that has been out there. Nobody really has taken that seriously. Nick, if you can distribute that. What we have done is look at a distribution formula that could kick into place when this money is in fact appropriated. And the concept basically is you have 114 small transit systems, you have 14 large transit systems. The 14 are several in Metro, and then Savannah, Macon, Augusta, Columbus, etc. You set aside 25% of the money for the small systems. For the large systems, you discount the rail miles for MARTA for two reasons. You want to be comparing apples to apples, road miles to road miles, what I call tire miles to tire miles. And MARTA has their own dedicated funding source, which none of the other, in a very large, meaningful way, have. What that does is, it then yields a formula that you see in front of us, where MARTA would basically see about 32 million. CAT, as the next largest system, would see about, I think, 14.7 million, and the formula rolls from there. DOT has this, ARC has this, Several of the senators have this, and we're just now in the process of rolling this out. We are getting good traction on this. What we've been told is this makes a lot of sense, and with that, that's where we stand at this point. Chad, would you have any comments?
I would have Nick, if you would, go into a little more depth in terms of the rationale behind our methodology that was used in developing it, and kind of answering any questions the board has. Because one of the things that we've done is, I don't think, and I haven't think that just because Marta's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, they get to call the shots. So what we propose to do is to push our own formula, of course with some consensus from the board, in a way that we think is more rational, because while we're a member of the Georgia Transit Association, I think it's also important that the other 114 smaller transit systems not get pushed around, because they also have a need for transit services, particularly in the area of paratransit, because those costs are being pushed back on all the counties as well. So, Nick, if you can kind of explain.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Question. Is this part of HB 106?
No, it's not.
This
is totally separate. This is basically,
this would not be tied into. Okay.
It's not tied into 106 or 170. We're hopeful that at some point in time, this could attach to the distribution process that would be used for that $100 million in bonds.
So we're just lobbying for this separately?
Yes.
Yes. And there are a couple of issues with it. First of all, there's an issue with the Georgia DOT funding situation, because if GDOT funds it, they have to own it. So we're looking at the funds being allocated through either the DCA or the State Toll Roll Authority, to have those funds distributed, as opposed to going through the Department of Transportation.
Well,
yeah, absolutely. So, so the sheet you have in front of you was developed in response to the proposal that MARTA had laid out for allocating this $100 million bond. Basically, there are four big pieces. And the first page, you can see there's separated out here: rural transit, small urban areas, medium-sized urban areas, which is where we are, and then large urban areas, which is only Atlanta. Just going through it real in a brief sort of manner. The rural transit methodology is effectively just a match to what the systems already are allocated. So approximately $23.5 million, which would be a direct match to what their Federal Transit Administration awards currently are. On the urban transit side, we try to stick with accepted methodologies there as well. As Mike had mentioned, this is a formula-based proposal which other states use. I believe Indiana is a close example of a state that uses a formula-based system, but they're certainly not alone. This formula incorporates revenue hours, revenue miles, and ridership. Revenue hours are weighted at 80%. The other two measures are weighted at 10% each. And those three pieces rather, using the formula of each transit system, lead to the breakdown that Mike listed. For CAT receiving just over $14 million, and MARTA receiving, you'll see at the back page.
Well, to clarify, I think that might mean the entire Atlanta metro area.
Correct.
So it's
yes.
MARTA, Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Clayton County, so on and so forth.
Correct. So yeah, so it's split between a variety of transit providers in that region. So yeah, that's basically it in brief. So any questions?
How active are those small groups?
The rural transit, or legislatively, I think it's a force to be very considered. They have a lot of representation and a lot of constituents. So yeah.
The problem with them is that none of them have really taken the lead, or let's see, I don't think one of them was willing to take on MARTA. I don't care. So, you know.
Yeah, nobody else is floating a formula out for this.
So right now it's MARTA's and ARC's, and then this would be the second one. for consideration.
What is V-Ride Incorporated, Atlanta?
I'm sorry. V-Ride. So there's a variety of transit providers in the Atlanta region and ARC, and I don't have specific details about all of them, but yeah, the largest one is MARTA. And
Okay.
You've got Gwinnett, you've got Cobb, there are a number there. I think the total amount that would be earmarked in this for the metro Atlanta area is probably in the $40 to $45 million range. And of course, that's where the population is as well. So it's a large number. But when you start looking at it in terms of road miles and the factors that Nick has talked about, it's basically substantiated and justified by that kind of data.
Are the other urban systems on board with this? Have they seen the formula?
They've seen the formula. We've not had much response on this at all. ARC, I think, is pretty much on board with this. We've shared this with them quite some time ago, early on, just for internal lobbyist to lobbyist discussions, and we've not had any knee-jerk reaction from anybody. The one modification that we did make at their request was we initially had talked about MARTA as representing all of the metro area, and in our discussions they said, well, where's Gwinnett, where's Cobb County Transit, where are some of these others? So that's when we went back and modified what the formula was to make certain that we had these 14 larger systems actually accounted for in this.
Just another question. Do you think with all this volleying back and forth with HB 170 that it's going to actually come into as law?
I think it's highly likely that we will see something. It's a little bit difficult to read the tea leaves and understand exactly how we're going to fall on this. From the action that was taken on Friday by the Senate, it appears that the House is much more supportive of seeing a tax shift / increase than the Senate. The Senate basically just pulled large amounts of increase that was in the House bill off the table. And the only area where they really have a increase is in the rental car tax, which mostly will be paid for by visitors to the state. The Senate did have language in the bill that would have levied a $25 registration fee for cars, $50 registration fee for trucks, and a $10 registration fee for motorcycles. That was eliminated on the Senate floor. Interest, and I can't remember the number that would have raised. We've had some discussions that a modest fee across the board might make some sense, and I think $13. I think ARC has done some back of the envelope calculations, and I think a $13 registration fee would raise in excess of $125 million.
I'm just curious because it keeps changing and amendments, and I'm just wondering if it's actually anything's going to happen.
I think they're committed to passing something, but again, we really won't know exactly what this is going to look like. I think the one thing that we can depend on is there is going to be that significant shift from sales tax collected on, and this gets very confusing. Currently, we have two categories of tax on gasoline: the motor fuel that is collected per gallon, and the sales tax that is collected per dollar. And when you start trying to figure out how this works, it's a little difficult from an accounting function. What we're basically doing is moving to a total per gallon excise tax, which will be dedicated to DOT, and doing away with the state sales tax per dollar. But what will remain will be the local sales taxes per dollar that are collected.
That fourth penny will now be dedicated to...
That fourth penny will disappear. There will be no state sales tax on gasoline or motor fuel.
So that won't go directly to GDOT?
No, it will not, but it will be replaced by, they're moving from 7.5 cents excise tax per gallon to a range of 24 to 29 cents. And we think it probably will come down closer to the 28 or 29 cents per gallon rather than the 24, because the 24 basically equates to a revenue neutral exercise, which yes gets more money to DOT, but DOT needs more money and more money. So an increase would significantly help them address the needs of the state.
Wayne?
Well, I just hope that this formula, I mean, most of the concerns of the Department of Transportation appear to be in the Atlanta area. And, I mean, obviously, we've all got to chip in and pay for it, so I hope that the funding formula that they come up with is fair.
Wayne?
HB 106, you said that's getting lesser coverage than.
Now, which one is 10? Oh, yeah, 106, I'm sorry. That is one that surfaced last week. HB 106, if you look it up, it is a piece of legislation that designates what roads are actually part of the state system. All of that language was stripped out last Thursday or Friday and replaced with the resurrected TIA moving forward. So that's one that is, while you had about 150 lobbyists in the meetings for 170, you had about 30 of us in the meetings for 106. But in many ways, not in many ways, in almost all ways, 106 is more important to the locals. 170 is state money that goes to the DOT and is used to address state needs. 106 gives us as local governments a tool to offer to the voters the opportunity to self-levy a tax. Now, whether it's on a region for the next 2 years, which would be basically the RDC region that we voted on 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or if we wait until 2017 and it's just Chatham County. It gives us the capability, actually gives the county and the city the capability to resurrect this process and move this forward to the voters to give them an opportunity to develop a list of projects and to levy a tax to do those things. And that would be extremely valuable, not only for roads projects within the community, but for CAT as well, because money for CAT would certainly be something that would be on the ballot with any kind of T-SPLOS that we move forward with.
And this is better. You want to go ahead and finish?
Yeah, if I could. My question was one of timing. You know, if this were to pass, would it be possible to get it on the ballot for 2016? Because the electorate tend to turn out in greater numbers in presidential years, so we might have a better shot at being able to get it passed at the local level.
The way the timeline is set at this point in time, it would have to be on the ballot for 16 from the region.
Yeah.
If it's not acted on from the regional basis for 10 years, as of July 1/17, then that opportunity goes away, and it defaults then to an individual county. There was discussion yesterday about pushing that date out to 2018 to allow a longer period for the regions to get together, so that if they can't get their act together and get something on the ballot for 16, then you could default and move to the 2018 election, which gives you a little more time to work with.
Bill?
Mike, I just want to make sure I understand. What you passed out to us, this is the funding formula that we're suggesting, is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the other funding formula that's out there is one that came from the ARC or from MARTA, or?
Came from the ARC at the request of MARTA.
Okay.
That one is not really being considered seriously.
Oh, I mean, is this the funding formula that people are looking at?
That's what we're walking around now. That's what we're beginning to walk around now. We did not start moving on it until we knew that money was going to be in the budget.
Right.
Now we're beginning to roll this out.
So who are our allies for this funding formula?
I think the large systems. I can't speak for MARTA, but we've not gotten any negative response from MARTA on this, and they have had this for the longest time of anybody ARC has it as well. We think our other allies on this are the small systems. Because basically, we're talking about them getting 23%, 25% of that money, whereas otherwise, they would get far less than that.
Right.
And so, we think that the rural folks would certainly step up. We would hope the rural folks, the rural systems, would step up to the table and embrace this formula or something similar to this formula.
Right.
What we want to do is lay out a framework that says, this is what we think would be a fair allocation distribution of this, as opposed to having the money allocated and then it default to a pure grant program. This is one-time money. This money's not going to be there on an annual basis. If it were going to be there on an annual basis, we probably could take a different approach and look at this. But this would provide money for a variety of things, particularly for our system, and that's what I'm focused on.
Right.
Is what is this going to mean for us? How do the numbers work for us? Obviously, the other numbers have to fall into place, and our task was to come up with something that made what that was logical and defensible in terms of trying to talk about how did you get to these numbers? Where did you get these?
One of the things I really like about this is I'm really happy to see that our system has taken a leadership role in coming up with an alternative, to what's being put out by Atlanta, and it puts us in a position to be a real leader among every system but, the MARTA, and stand up for not only our system but similarly situated systems, albeit smaller. But we're a system that is outside of Atlanta, and we should stand with the other outfits that are outside of Atlanta as well. And I think this is a really good idea. I'm really glad to see this.
We've had some discussions, particularly with our local legislation, local delegation, and one of the things that in our discussions that they'd like to see if the funds are allocated is that we use it to reduce the CAT debt, i.e. to eliminate the CAT debt that exists, and again give us a solid foundation moving forward. So elimination of the CAT debt, the acquisition of buses, as well as part of the down payment was proposed streetcar system.
So they want to borrow the money to give to us to pay off our debt. Is that, since these are bonds, this money is coming from bonds?
So that's one of the, in our conversations with the local delegation, their priorities have been to pay off our debt, acquire new vehicles, shelters, as well as a down payment on the streetcar system.
And is there a reason that this money will be generated from bonds as opposed to, the taxing authority? I mean, I'm sure that that's a longer conversation, but it's just interesting that funding for transit is being funded with bonds as opposed to all the other machinations of the taxing authority.
Well, the state this year is issuing about $1 billion in bonds to do a variety of things, including diking the dredge spoilage area across the river. I think about $4 to $5 million for part of the bulkhead on Hutchison Island, $100 million for bridges, and significant amounts of money for new buildings at colleges, including Savannah State, Skidway Institute of Oceanography, Armstrong, Georgia Southern, and the like. Bonding for $100 million is about $8 million a year, and when you start looking at the debate about trying to get the $1 billion in hard cash to DOT, you see how difficult that is. So it's far easier for them to fund this kind of project with bonds, than it is to figure out how you're going to get $100 million out of the budget. Plus, there's the constitutional issue that you can't spend motor fuel excise taxes on transit. It has to be spent on roads and bridges. And even though HB 170 goes to great lengths to define transportation purposes, that description, as you well know, does not transcend to over the constitutional restriction, but does define how the local money can be spent once it's collected. So again, it is the fact that you need they want $100 million for transit. They want $100 million for bridges. What's the best place to get that money? What is the simplest place to get that money? And plus, it's not subject to the back and forth, aside from the back and forth on the budget that we're seeing. So it's not as much of a football as we're seeing the dollars become in the debate over what is HB 170 going to actually look like.
One of the things that I think is interesting about this is, the governor was largely absent from coming up with any suggestions as to how to go about funding, the difficulties that we're seeing, with roads and bridges and transit and that sort of thing. But now the governor's weighing in and saying, I have to have a minimum of $1 billion. How do you do that? How do you sort of sit on the sidelines and let the legislators sort of battle it out as to how this is going to be done, and then the governor comes in and says, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, this is what I want.
That's the governor's prerogative. I think the governor did not want to taint the process at the beginning to talk about how he would like to see this done. And as he was quoted at one point in time on this particular issue, he basically said, I'm going to let the legislators legislate. They have a very good track record of doing that, and let's see what happens. I think he is weighing in at a very good point now, particularly since the House bill basically would generate $700 million to $800 million. The Senate version would generate ostensibly $800 million, and basically saying, okay, guys, you're getting close, but the bar has got to be at this level. And that's driven by what DOT and the committee basically said the revenue needs, at a minimum, needed to be. So it's going to be interesting to see how they get there, if they get there.
And I have one last question, and this goes to the idea of the legislation that was proposed to reconfigure this board. So who in the legislature wants to reconfigure the board from our delegation, and who doesn't?
Give me a second here to think this through. The legislation was proposed by the county. The legislation was, and there were two pieces of legislation, one to reconfigure the board, one to set up a process by which a decision could be made by the county to extend services under any condition. Right. The Senator Lester Jackson agreed to introduce the legislation for the county. All of the West Side mayors were opposed, which therefore brings Ben Watson to the table, representing some West Side in being opposed. And virtually all of the House members were opposed as well. Ron Stevens, Jesse Petrie, Bob Bryant, Craig Gordon, Bill Hitchens having a piece of the area, but fully supportive and opposing as well. Mickey Stevens, there was no support for this.
For both pieces of legislation.
Either piece of legislation moving forward at all. And our explanation to them about this, and the chairman helped significantly on this as well, was not necessary. The time to change the board, if in fact you were going to change the board, was not right. And if you were going to change the board, the structure that was proposed was not right. The legislation that would have set forth a framework was unnecessary The board is already taking steps to do that, but more importantly, because of the constitutional authority that the county commission has to establish a special service tax district, could not be corralled by a fence that would require certain steps to be taken in order for them to exercise that authority. And that was the argument that we utilized in discussing this with the members. Quite frankly, the members were not in favor of doing this whatsoever, and they agreed very readily. Senator Jackson, a couple of weeks ago, did float the idea of actually drawing a district for Pooler to serve that particular area, and that was something that we also said was premature, was not necessary, and truly, in order to extend services to that area or any other area, that decision needed to be driven by what the economics were going to be, rather than to sit and say, oh, this is a great idea, let's provide service out here and let the financial chips fall where they may. Well, that didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
We understand his effort, we applaud his interest in doing that, but we're running a business, basically, and we have to make sure that whatever we do is going to allow us to continue operating in a solvent manner.
I do think that that reaction to the legislation is a reflection on our chairman, as well as the confidence that the legislature has had in this board as it exists, and I think we should recognize that for what it is. Thanks.
Just a couple of quick questions. We are still moving forward with our study.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. I'll talk about that.
All right, because to me, that's what we need to do, regardless of what happens with this proposal from the commission chairman.
Right.
So I'm concerned that we continue on the path that we're on to justify running the business, as you put it, most effectively and getting people in Chatham County where they need to be.
Right, and Chad will address that. We are well along on that process.
Okay. Because but what the chairman of the commission was requesting was a slightly different study.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to be.
But you emphasize that it was the chairman, not the full commission.
It wasn't the commission.
Yeah, I think that needs to be noted.
Priscilla.
Thank you. If everyone is finished with the questioning, I just want to applaud you, Nick and others, especially Dr. Reese and staff. The information that you gave us today was certainly very, very valuable, and it means that you've done your homework. And I'm very, very pleased, and I just wanted to say that we appreciate the services that you render to CAT, and that the information that was provided to us this morning is very valuable, and the questions and answers that were given were very, very good. So thank you so much for your service.
Well, thank you, Commissioner.
And the simple facts of the matter is, if that legislation had been passed, it would have dissolved this board.
Exactly.
And this board is working hard. We've got members here that are really concerned about the transportation of the people in our community, which is really important, because multitudes, 24,000 individuals in our county do not have personal transportation, and it's incumbent upon us to help those people. And our Chatham Area Transit Authority is putting things in place, and hopefully with Chad, staff members, and us, that we get these things coming from the government. And I can tell you this, I was 8 years on the Coastal Regional. That's some 13 counties that belong to that, is split up statewide on that. And I spoke out many times for the smaller counties because I knew how important it was to them on different particular issues in that. And so we had a really good, because what I had pushed along is to help those smaller counties, and they, of course, support us, because they see that we care about them and not just because we're the biggest county in that coastal region. And thank you. I'd like to tell Mike, thank you very much, because I spoke with him many times and also did other things too.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent you. It's a pleasure and a challenge at the same time.
It's not an easy task.
It's very politic.
Not an easy task with the politics of it.
Okay, thank you all very much. We appreciate this, and of course, Chad, your participation in that and whatever else that occurred. Okay, next is Executive Director's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I say anything, I want to, while it's not indicative shown here, it'll be in next month's report. We had a very good St. Patrick's Day. We doubled the ridership and revenue this year compared to last year. Not quite what it is on a Saturday, but better weather, so it was a better day for us. Overall, ridership on the fixed route side was down from 308,296, down about 4%. Productivity down from 21.82 to 21 passengers per hour. On-time performance was somewhat consistent, as well as complaints. We did have one preventable accident for the month compared to 2 in the previous, and fare box recovery was down about 0.5%.
What do you attribute? I mean, this isn't the best report. What do you attribute this to?
Well, we looked back and we tried to identify, and it was down pretty much across the board. Year to date was still up, but it was difficult. We didn't know whether it was a weather-related issue, just in particular what it was, but it was just down slightly. For instance, it's about 10 people a day on the Route 14 that weren't there anymore, or didn't ride during this month. So it's just, it's not something that's alarming at this point, but it's something that we're going to continue to watch.
I haven't seen a report quite that looked like this in a while.
Yeah, well, your reaction was the same as mine when I saw it. So we went back and kind of scoured everything to see if there was something that was unusual, and we weren't able to identify anything that was unusual out of place.
The weather was unusual. It's cold.
It was cold.
Wayne?
I was just a little bit confused here. The narrative
Yeah,
represents February, and then the grid is January.
Yes, I saw that.
So this
it
is
is
February
February.
data.
Yes,
Oh, so these are February numbers?
These are February numbers.
Oh.
I was wondering why we didn't have February data here.
Yeah. So, it is February numbers. So, for the paratransit ridership was up 9%. Productivity was down from 1.66 to 1.5. Some of that has to do with the use of our taxi service, because taxi service is not quite, it's not as efficient as the fixed route services. But we're using the taxi cab services for some of our late night, early morning trips and some overflow situations.
And cost-wise, how effective is that?
It's not overly burdensome, so it's somewhat consistent. The only area of inconsistency is in the area of productivity. It's not quite as productive, but I think overall it's going to be more cost effective, given that a number of the trips are late night. So we kind of talked about our paratransit ridership follows our fixed route ridership. So when you're at about 6 or 7 o'clock at night, the ridership falls dramatically, but your vehicles are still on the road, and you have another spike around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So now we're able to bring some of our vehicles in and push those trips up on taxis. And if we plan them correctly, we're putting them on short trips, which are much more cost effective than the long trips. So it's all coming out.
But we're still tracking the numbers.
Yes,
and how effective this is.
Overall, we had one preventable accident during the month on the paratransit side. Overall, year-to-date fixed route is still up 4%. Marine is down 7%. Paratransit is down. Marine is up 7%. Paratransit is up 9%. Overall, on the system, we're up about 4%. It's also interesting to note on the marine services for St. Patrick's Day, since one of the docks was down, ridership on the ferry service was a fraction of what it had been in the past. And I'll talk about that in a second here. On the functional assessments, we conducted 39 interviews during the month of February. Of those 39 people that we interviewed, 15 were referred for functional assessments. Out of the 15 that were referred for functional assessments, 10 of those 15 were denied, are going to be denied paratransit service. So that's going to be a significant percentage of people we're referring to functional assessments that are being denied. That group who went through on the first set has until May 10th to file an appeal, and we have a appeal committee set up.
Why were they denied?
They were denied because they can use a fixed route service.
And I think in the past, excuse me for interrupting, I think that we haven't been checking that as much, because it's been not very often reported to me that people, if you've been using it, that could use fixed route. And with the cost of paratransit and the spike in the use of paratransit, we've got to look at it. We really do.
What were the, specifically, what factors led you to decide they could be using the fixed route?
We have a third party, and I think some of the board members went to take part in the functional assessment exercise, so that the board could get a real picture of what we're asking people to go through to determine whether or not they can use a fixed route service or whether or not they have to use a paratransit. So it's a whole battery of tests that we went through.
Wayne?
I'm just a little bit concerned for the phone calls that this board's going to get, given that 2/3 of the people that went through functional assessments were denied.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a process, we've got an appeals process, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised but what folks
Don't you worry,
understand.
most of them are in my district.
Hey, but here's the simple facts of the matter is this, that they don't qualify for that. And that's the whole situation. They're not qualified, and what they want to do be picked up at their door when they can go out and use the regular system. It's not denying them transportation. It's just on the paratransit, because we know, this board knows how important it is for paratransit that we provide that for the people that need it.
Really need it.
Yes.
Exactly. I totally agree. I mean, it's written into the regulations as to what the qualifications are in order to be eligible for paratransit. I'm just saying that a lot of people pay Telluride or paratransit as a right.
Yeah, because it's $1.80 compared to 30 cents more you picked up at your door compared to having to go to the bus.
Well, I just hope we're dangling the carrots as well as administering the stick. So the travel training that we talked about.
We've got to. I mean, we don't
Yeah,
have a choice.
because we still got some people that are on paratransit right now that have that, but they really should still be on the regular system. And that's what they're doing now, is talking to some of those on paratransit to see about that they really qualify at this particular point, because those people that need it, it's important that we provide it. But the ones that can use the normal service, that's the situation.
Yeah, I understand. One more question. The 10 out of the 15 were they not eligible at all? Were they provisionally eligible?
Not
or
eligible at all.
They just weren't eligible at all.
Bill?
But if I remember correctly, during the month of January, everyone who went in for an interview was determined to be eligible. Is that not right?
No, well, the first month we kind of kicked it off.
Was it
Yes,
February?
in February.
Okay. All right, so So, I mean, there are several who went through the interview process and were deemed to be eligible. It was only those who were then referred to have the actual functional assessment.
Right.
That there were 10 of those who did not necessarily qualify.
Right.
So we're dropping about 25%.
Yeah.
Based on, and I do think that, and particularly for those of us who saw the way the functional assessments, were being administered and the like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and I do think that it does go to discern whether or not someone's able to utilize the fixed route system or not. So really, it's I think what we're trying to do is to ensure that the quality of the Telluride system and the utilization by those for whom it's designed, as opposed to those for whom it's not.
Right, because you see, year to date, we're up 9%, and that's on top of a 9 or 10% previous year, 9 or 10% the previous year.
Right.
So you're talking 30, 40% aggregate over 4 years.
Just one last thing, we've got in the budget for an additional accessible cab, right?
Yeah, we have the funding for it. The budget hasn't come out yet, but that will be in there. Yes.
Will that have much of an impact on the Telluride usage or paratransit usage?
Depends on how much the system continues to grow.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a couple of things that I'd like to add that are not on there. We have received the final paperwork for transfer of the former Chatham County dock to the City of Savannah to the Trade Authority, from the Trade Authority to CAT. So we received the final paperwork on the dock transition. And so once we get final FTA approval, we'll go about rebuilding that dock with the heavy duty concrete pylon, so on and so forth, because it's a dock that's failed repeatedly over and over, almost in the water on the last occasion before. So we're not able to use the City Hall dock currently, but we have a grant pending from FTA, and we've gotten the final paperwork, so we'll go about hopefully rebuilding that dock.
Just for experience, have we filed anything with the Corps or the DNR to make sure we've got permits in hand?
We have the permits, we have the, it was an environmental
assessment by the Corps engineers and GI.
Yeah. So we have all the required paperwork.
Because they'll come out and stop you if you want.
Hey guys, just a quick question about that. I saw something in the paper a couple of weeks ago where the Trade Center was shifting some other responsibility to us.
No. That's what they said.
So there was a suggestion of that.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, people say a lot of stuff.
Is that right?
So what is that? What's that all about?
And basically, they don't have enough money to run it, and they have to subsidize it.
So they don't have enough money to run the ferry system?
Right. They don't have enough money to run it, so they have to subsidize it, and they are upset about subsidizing it. And so one of their solutions is, well, CAT owns it all, we'll just get out of business and let them run it. Well, God bless you, but that dog don't hunt. So we'll run it if you come. We run it now, but we have agreements in place that require you to pay. And so I'll put it this way: if we end up operating it, it won't have a negative impact upon our budget.
Okay. Was there some reference to an agreement coming to an end?
There is a reference to the agreement can come to an end. We are working on different funding alternatives to help shore up our downtown dot operations altogether. It's something that hasn't been explored or looked at in quite some time. As a matter of fact, it's kind of a segue into you finding your report,
right,
to buying your report from the Savannah Mobility Management. And as you know, Nick is the administrator, who is a full-time employee of CAT. So Nick is working on some alternative financing plans for some of the downtown operations, including the ferry, the downtown shuttle, so on and so forth. So as those things continue to progress, we'll move forward. But it will require some the legwork in that is primarily with the city, because most of the downtown operations, the city is the ball carrier in most of those operations in terms of funding. Okay, so.
Thank you.
The next thing is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, we'll be having a town hall meeting in Pooler, where the consultants from Qatar will be presenting the results of their study, getting community feedback, so on and so forth, before we have a final report back to this board. So Wednesday night is Pooler and Thursday night is Garden City. Both of them are at 6 o'clock.
Mr. Executive Director, at that town hall meeting, will we have the business representation there at that meeting to add comments?
I can't tell you exactly who's going to come and who's going to show. We've invited a host of people to come and take part and hear what.
Does that include the businesses that
Yes.
exist out there, including Tanger?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the hope is that they will come and share their thoughts on the different service options, if there be what type of services we're looking at, so on and so forth. So it's at the Pooler City Hall.
Yeah.
And the Garden City Hall.
This was done in conjunction and with the full understanding and support of the mayor and the aldermen and the administration of both Pooler, Garden City, and Port Wentworth as well, and Bloomingdale. So all of those West Side communities were aware and participated in actually putting these meetings together.
And so we've asked both our business advisory committee as well as our transit advisory committee to help take part in the program as well. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have to report.
Okay, next, under item 6, unit updates, information only. Number 1, safety and training update.
The safety and training report is in your packet, and I'll entertain the questions you may have on that.
Any questions on that item, safety and training? All right, next, service and delivery update.
The service and delivery report is in your packet. I will entertain the questions you may have on that.
Chairman, would someone explain to me what is the criteria for a bus passing passengers waiting at a bus stop? Is it because the bus is full?
That should be the only
Okay.
Well,
is there any way we could put signage on the bus so people will understand why the bus is passing?
When a bus passes you, it should put the sign up there. There's a message on there. It's supposed to say, "Bus full, please wait." And so, which is pretty, it's a pretty common occurrence during the peak hours on a few of our routes. More so when you get into a Wednesday or a Friday in the afternoons, it's also pretty common. So we know.
Can we poll the drivers to see if they're using that signage? Because I know that there's times that they don't, and I'm not criticizing them, but people feel stranded when, the bus just passes them by.
Yeah.
And nobody says anything. I've had several calls on it.
There's enough for
And then they're not sure whether there's another one within, a certain time,
Yeah.
so.
Yes, all right, if the bus is full, then tell everybody here now, when is the next bus to take care of those people? When is that supposed to be? In other words, the bus that's on that route, the bus is full, you've got people out there waiting, and hopefully they'll have bus full on that,
Next bus.
on the sign before they get there, so people can see that.
Mhm.
And so they shouldn't, go real fast, because the drivers want to help the people that are riding the buses. But what's the situation on that amount of people that are waiting at the different bus stops?
For the next bus, that's what I'm saying.
The timing on the next bus.
Oh, it depends upon the route. So.
Yeah.
I was waiting for that to come up.
I didn't ask you. Where's your friend?
I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
But
It's great for the mobile app.
But it depends upon the route. Some routes are 30 minutes. So, but the ones that are receipt that we have capacity issues with are 30-minute frequency of the bus.
So 30 minutes over there, and let's do something too about so that our passengers understand that, whatever we can do to put that out, because some people, it goes, and they might not know that the next bus won't be there for 30 minutes.
Right. Yes, sir.
So let's make sure we advertise that in some way so that our passengers know this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Can I ask just a quick question? Is there, do you ever for instance, like at 5:30, on a weekday afternoon and you're passing people, you ever just put another bus on that route just to?
We will, or we used to, depends on if we got another bus available.
Yeah, I understand.
You have to have a bus and an operator.
Yeah.
And if it is a severe situation, I can tell you this, it's pretty common on Sundays under Route 14 that you put in what we call a plug bus, because we do know that Route 14 on Sunday is over capacity.
Right.
It's probably one of our largest complaint getters. The 31 in the morning time, we've adjusted the schedule to add another bus there. The Route 3 that's going to the west side up by Pooler, we've done a couple things there. We've had to add a bus, and then we've actually had to take a 40-foot bus to run there because that route is over capacity. So we're seeing on the outbound trip 69 people on that trip leaving. And how are they carrying 69 people when they're supposed to carry 47? So so we have some pretty staggering numbers on some of our routes. It makes you wonder about all the arguments you hear about, well, all the buses running empty.
Oh, yeah.
Because most of our complaints is that the bus is over full.
Yeah.
So, but you have people getting on and off the route, and you have to find the segment. So you may see it empty, but it may have just dropped off 35 people 5 minutes before that. So.
Okay. Any other questions on service and delivery? You got anything else on that? Next item will be system development update.
System development report is in your packet, and I will entertain any questions you may have on that.
Any questions on the system development? Next, financial update.
The financial update is in your packet, and I'll entertain any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay, let's move on to old business.
I don't have any old business, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone here have any questions about old business? All right, let's go new business. Anything on new business?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I guess one of the things is that there wasn't much, on the legislative update we talked about, while we hadn't asked for any formal approval or anything, it was just a consensus that the board would think that it's okay to move forward with pushing this, because the idea is now we're going to do it somewhat of a systematic structure to go out and officially solicit the support of the Georgia Transit Association and its 100+ members, and to do a full court press on the proposal.
On our funding formula.
Yes.
I think Mr. Broker summed it up perfectly. It's great that you're taking the initiative on it and driving the program.
All right. Okay. Anybody for new business again? Okay. Then, thank you all for coming.
Beverly's birthday yesterday, too.
Oh, okay. Listen. Beverly, who is the assistant for our executive director, her birthday was yesterday, and I think that we all should, thank her for the work that she's doing, and also that she be blessed with many good, healthy years in the future, and that God would look after her.
All right.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
You're political.
You know, that stuff fascinates me.
Without any competition, I think it's on his own.
You know, it's all, you know, I don't really get in.
I would be one guy there.
Squeeze everybody in.